Liz.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the launch of our first EDAS Community Wealth Building Open Learning Session in 2022. My name is Liz McEntee, Chair of EDAS, and I'm delighted to be welcoming an excellent lineup of speakers and contributors this afternoon, including Tom Arthur, Minister for Public Affairs, Finance, Planning and Community, Neil McEnroy, former Chief Executive with CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, but here today as Community Wealth Building Advisor with the Scottish Government, along with a range of experts, Vary Patterson, Gordon Mole, Stephen Balfour and Callum Ian McIver, all of whom are working to build community wealth building in their locales and who we'll hear from as the afternoon progresses. This event builds on the success of a programme of work we at EDAS began last year, which was delivered with CLES in partnership with the Scottish Government and COSLA. Our programme this year aims to support as wide an audience as possible of members and colleagues to integrate a community wealth building approach to economic development in the work that they do. Most of you will know, I'm sure, that there has been over the last few years a community wealth building action plan and process taking place across the country in a range of pilot areas. This is now completed. Much has been learned, and as a result, there are now many other Scottish localities taking an interest in community wealth building, and indeed many are in this audience today. So to support this, the delivery partners, the Scottish Government, CLES and EDAS, along with a range of experts, are working together this year to deliver community of practice sessions for the pilot areas, along with open to all learning sessions to encourage wider engagement, share good practice and offer continuing professional development. The latter is what today's session offers in that it's open to all. We want these events to provide insights as you translate policy into practice, with a particular emphasis on identifying and addressing the barriers and enablers to community wealth building across the country. And at each open session, we will share learning that has come from the Community of Practice expert group. EDAS's role in all of this is to promote collaboration and learning, and I can say with conviction that we're passionate about this subject. We feel the time is now for this approach to imbue and inform economic development, strategy, planning and implementation, and for it to be central to the way that practitioners work and not viewed as an optional add-on. For this to happen, obviously, people need to know about community wealth building and to understand the core elements needed to make it happen. So I hope this open session will provide you with food for thought in whatever role you currently play, and that when you leave here today, you will do so with ideas and energy to join or link further with this growing movement of community wealth building practitioners across the country. As usual for these meetings, we ask participants to actively use the chat box to raise any points of interest or questions that you have for the panel. And you can do that throughout the session, but of course there will be punctuation points throughout this afternoon where you have the opportunity to come in with any questions that you have. So having set out the context for this afternoon and a bit of background, can I now welcome Neil McEnroy to open our session with an update.
Great, Liz, thanks very much. Delighted to be here and excited to be here. Thanks to EDAS and partners for putting this together. I'm Neil McEnroy. I'm a Community Wealth Building Advisor to the Scottish Government within the Economic Development Directorate. I do that 2 days a week. I've been doing that since July 2020. I'm seconded from CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, the UK's national organisation for local economies, where I was the CEO, and we've spearheaded community wealth building in Preston, Londonborough, Newham, Lewis on the south coast, Wigan and a range of other localities within England. In Scottish Government, I sit in a growing community wealth building team headed by Stephen White in the local economy division. And I think on call today, there's also my colleagues Tracy Jackson, David Patrick and Laura Bremen, I think, are on the call, maybe others as well. It's worth also mentioning, I think, just as we backdrop, and there is an event, the next event on the 15th of February is an international look at community wealth building. And in that, I work for 3 days a week, an American think tank or research and development lab called the Democracy Collaborative, which works out of Washington. And in that role, I'm advancing community wealth building also in the United States. The moment I work in Chicago, California, Greater Boston area. A lot of that work, and again, it's all the parallels here, a lot of that work links into Biden's American Rescue Plan, Building Back Better, with community wealth building there seen as offering the United States and localities within the United States a different way of doing local economic development and revitalisation, as they call it, but regeneration. So there's parallels there. There's also legislation getting put up to the hill around community wealth building too, which I'm also involved in. So there's parallels there. And it's interesting, just as the wee flip that happens. I could be in a meeting, say, with Gordon and Fife, and then I'm flipping over to meeting an action group meeting in Chicago. So it's quite discombobulating, but quite invigorating nevertheless. So that's me. Today is on turning the dial on community wealth building in Scotland. So turning the dial, what's that metaphor all about? This is like turning up the volume. Yeah, turning the volume up to 11. Yeah, turning it up on strategy, policy, and action. So it's turning the dial, turning things up. And then this is a kind of broad theory of change here, is that it's incrementally moving on with things on the ground, but most importantly, from a Scottish Government point of view, strategic activity that Scottish Government has taken, including the potential to the community wealth building legislation. Now, you'll all probably are familiar with community wealth building. Just a wee bit of a backdrop, just very quickly. Community wealth building is a focus on wealth and who an economy works for and who it delivers for. It is advancing economic development into what we would say in the movement, a genuine economic system change, not just tackling wealth inequality and transforming towards a well-being economy, but actually tackling the causes that cause the ills that we have in our country, to secure a practical way of genuinely delivering on a well-being economy for people, place, and planet. Now, some argue, of course, well, we just build more wealth and redistribute what we've got. Yeah, that's what we do. Well, Scotland's on with that. But community wealth building is not just growing wealth and redistribute what we've got. It's talking here about pre-distribution of wealth. And in the context of climate crisis, pandemic, fast-moving global capital in terms of investment, disinvestment, there are limits to redistribution. We also need, after the fact of growth, we need to actually think about how do we think about pre-distribution during growth, during economic production itself. So it's that pre-distribution, getting right into the heart of system change here. Community wealth building is not just a new name for something. It's not just a new badge. Yeah, this is about a new culture of how we work, how we organise the economy, who owns it, and who it works for. And in this, all of you today, all of you, public, private, social sectors, are vital players in that movement and in that system change. Now, to do that, there's a number of mechanisms, but there's the classic five pillars of community wealth building. And Mr. Arthur will talk a little bit more about progress on that in terms of land and property, spending, finance, workforce, and inclusive ownership. All different ways that you portion out wealth, and how do we turn the dial on each of those elements. And of course, there's a growing number of places, and you'll hear from some of them today, who are producing community wealth building action plans as part of their economic strategies, weaving it into their activities and delivering on those transformative actions across those five pillars. And that includes North Ayrshire, alongside five other areas, including Clackmannanshire, South of Scotland, Western Isles, Tay Cities, Fife, Glasgow City region. And what's very heartening to us, of course, those were areas that were directly sponsored, if you like, by the Scottish Government. There's other areas, and they'll be here today, no doubt, picking up on the community wealth building agenda. And that does include, though not fully, it does include Glasgow City, Dundee City, South Lanarkshire, all to name but a few, who are pressing on with their community wealth building plans. And then it's not just localities, of course. There's agencies picking up on this as well. There's health boards, universities, third sector interfaces, and other anchor organisations as part of community wealth building, as part of community planning partnerships, addressing and seeing how they can start to turn the dial on community wealth building. The rollout continues and will be enhanced when we introduce potential legislation during the latter end of this Parliament. The bill will hopefully consolidate and augment existing activity, securing greater economic leverage and benefit for local people and communities across all of Scotland. So that's a little bit of outline myself, what this turning the dial means, and a little bit of a sketch of what's been happening. So let's get cracking. Let's get on with afternoon proceedings, and I'll pass you back to Liz. Liz. You're on mute, Liz.
Sorry, apologies about that.
Congratulations, you get the first award for the being on mute.
And it won't be the last, I'm sure. And I was in full flow there as well. But I was just saying, that was great, Neil. Thank you for such an excellent summary of where we've got to so far and where we're headed. I'm just now going to move on. I'm delighted to obviously be welcoming Tom Arthur, MSP, to our session today. And Tom was appointed as the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth in May 2021. And his responsibilities include planning, town centre regeneration, including business improvement districts, community empowerment, community planning, public bodies policy, public sector pay, etc., etc. But community wealth building is at the heart of much of what he is involved with now, and clearly the legislation is part of that. So, Tom, are you with us? Can we bring you to the screen?
I am indeed, Liz.
Input. I'm not quite sure why. Is it just me? I'm not sure if I can see you.
He's there. He's
Can you hear me?
I hear you fine, Tom.
Yeah,
I can hear you.
All's well, Liz.
Good, good. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Tom.
Look, Liz, thank you very much, and thank you to EDAS and partners for organising this event this afternoon. And indeed, the workshops that you've been running for some time now, I think make a really valuable contribution to the discussion and discourse. Just a heads up, I have been having some very challenging connectivity issues over the past day. So if my face freezes in some unflattering position, it's probably my internet that has went out. So I will, if you bear with me, I will try and get it back on. But I'm not going to attempt to it anymore. I'll just get things kicked off as far as my remarks go. We're obviously, like every other country in the world, at a very challenging time. I think we find ourselves 2 decades into the 21st century. We're dealing with a global pandemic. We are still experiencing the effects just a decade on from the global financial crash. And we are seeing tensions in Eastern Europe at levels that many of us thought were consigned to history in 1989, 1990. But the challenges that we face at home with our economy are significant, but so are the opportunities. And indeed, in the context of all of these other challenges, our single biggest challenge is, of course, the climate crisis. And there is the ingrained inequalities that we are well aware of, which have been exacerbated throughout the pandemic. And we are also continuing to experience the effects of Brexit, which of course, rather than being done, is very much still a live issue, with consequences very much still remaining to be seen. So I do want to say I'm very optimistic, and one of the reasons I'm very optimistic is all the people who are here today and the fantastic community wealth building movement we're seeing across Scotland, across the wider UK, and indeed across the world. And it's great to have Neil's involvement in the Scottish Government and also bringing that international dimension to bear. But I'm also optimistic because of where I'm from. I'm working from home today, but home for me is Johnston, in the constituency I represent of Renfrewshire South. There's another couple of towns in Renfrewshire South you might have heard of. One is Barrhead, where I'm from, but the other one is Linwood, which became synonymous with industrial decline. But as any of you are aware of some of the sterling efforts around community empowerment in Linwood, it's also quite an inspiring place in the way in which local people have worked together collaboratively to address some of the challenges that they are facing. And I know that what we're seeing in Linwood has been replicated the length and breadth of Scotland. And it's been one of my pleasures and privileges since being appointed Minister in May of last year to visit and see some of that action firsthand that's been taking place. So as I say, we do face the challenges in Scotland of an economic transition to a new industrial and net zero future. And that needs to work for people, place, and indeed the planet. We have that global responsibility as well. Now, community wealth building has been adopted by the Scottish Government is a key policy with the potential to deliver practically on this future, helping to build a genuine well-being economy in which all people in Scotland enjoy greater wealth, health, our new 10-year national strategy for economic transformation. This strategy can create new jobs and further embed fair work principles, supporting the achievement of a well-being economy. Our COVID recovery strategy, published last year, features a wide range of actions to rebuild our economy and secure a recovery that is both green and fair. In this, we are committed to supporting all local authorities in Scotland to develop and implement community wealth building action plans as part of their local recovery activity. The 2021 programme for government confirmed our plans to introduce legislation on community wealth building, as Neil had mentioned. And as we work towards that, I want to be clear in our purpose and our proposals. A key part of this work will be listening to all of our partners on the action required to ensure Scotland's long-term prosperity and well-being. The community wealth building is a refinement of our approach to economic development. It is an approach that builds on work today. I think that was an important point that Neil made. It's not just a label or a badge, it's a cultural change, it's an ethos as well. And of course, we do have the strategic and practical 5-pillar approach developed by CLES, and that of course aims to add value by binding partners together, but not to replace anything that is already working well on the ground. And at the heart of community wealth building is the approach and the recognition that redistribution of wealth through the benefit system, for example, where we are seeking to maximise our powers available to us within Scotland, we also recognise that that only goes so far. And it's the right thing to do, and many families do rely upon this essential income. We know that there's more we can do, and that speaks to the point that Neil had made with regards to pre-distribution. So that might be in the form of earned income or less direct and linked to the ownership of land and community assets. But fundamentally, we want to see more people in Scotland having a greater ownership stake in the Scottish economy, and in doing so to tackle structural inequality. So where are we now? Well, every local authority in Scotland is working with partners on actions that will propel and assist community wealth building outcomes. It seems that at least 1/3 of our local authorities are developing their own strategies. As I mentioned, in relation to the COVID recovery strategy, we want to work with all 32 local authorities, learning lessons from the 5 pilot areas in particular to frame impactful strategies and action plans. Our pilot areas in Clackmannanshire, south of Scotland, Western Isles, Tay Cities Fife and Glasgow City region have been examining how the 5 pillars of community wealth building, land and property, workforce, spending, finance and inclusive ownership, in combination, offer a practical model supporting the change required to achieve our collective ambitions. A huge amount of contributory activity is led by the Scottish Government and its agencies, local authorities, the third sector and businesses. At its heart, community wealth building is, of course, a new means to plan and implement economic development in a local area. Underpinning each local authority-led strategy will be a wider range of actions and investments, all combining to achieve positive outcomes. The important thing with each of these actions is what works and what doesn't. We need to do more of the former and, of course, less of the latter. Under each of these pillars, we have a number of policy actions and PFG commitments that support our aims. In addition, each pilot area is developing their own approaches under all or some of the community wealth building pillars. So I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight some of the key successes and actions underway on each of the pillars. So first, on land and property, the National Planning Framework 4, which is currently under consultation until the end of March, sets out our priorities and policies for the planning system up to 2045 and how our approach to planning and development will help achieve a net zero sustainable Scotland by 2045. The Land Reform Bill, planned for later in this parliamentary term will look to ensure that land and land use supports our ambitions for a wellbeing economy that helps us to transition towards and indeed beyond net zero. A number of the pilot areas are looking to gain a better understanding of the assets held by the public sector anchor institutions, such as health boards, and their community wealth building potential. Others are exploring the use of land as a tool to develop a greener economy in the form of community energy production and bringing vacant and derelict land back into more productive uses, benefiting people, businesses and planet. On the workforce pillar, our vision shared with the Fair Work Convention is that by 2045, people in Scotland will have a world-leading working life where fair work drives success, well-being and prosperity for individuals, businesses, organisations and society as a whole. Our programme for government commits us to exploring fair work agreements, which could complement and support our drive to becoming a fair work nation. Within the Scottish Government, we are applying fair work first criteria to grants, sponsorships and procurement activity right across the public sector, which includes all local authorities, NHS and integrated health boards. We are ensuring in the legislation to establish the South of Scotland Enterprise and the Scottish National Investment Bank that each had to further fair work through their activities. We want to encourage more and more employers, businesses and financial institutions to see the value of fair work for them, their employees and the wider economic community in which they operate. All of the pilot areas are looking at the workforce pillar and how fair work can be embedded by making better links between national and local employability programmes, local public and private sector investments and local jobs needs. This is manifesting in employment charters which local anchor institutions sign up to and how anchor institutions can stimulate employment opportunities through spend. And on the spend pillar, we want to maximise the impact of our public spend through procurement and other investment activity to help develop innovation within our economy, strengthen local sustainable supply chains that support different business models and increase the stake that local people and businesses have in their local economy. Collectively across government and pilot areas, we are raising awareness of the wider local economic benefits from public spend, deepening the awareness and application of community benefits in procurement through the development of community wish lists. And in addition, pilot areas are looking at the collective commissioning potential across public sector anchors to maximise the beneficial impacts for their localities. On finance, through the pilots, we are seeking greater joining up of public sector funds to address the issue of derelict land. We are also seeing a deepening recognition, visibility and use of social investment, including community development finance initiatives, and work is ongoing to promote a move from investing in fossil fuels within local government pension schemes. And finally, on inclusive ownership, broader community ownership is central to that system change and how we can create an economy that tackles poverty and entrenched inequality within our renewal. Within our collective public procurement, we can work to support the inclusion of local SMEs, social enterprises and cooperatives within supply chains. This builds on the work undertaken by the Cooperative Development Service, which supports growth through employee ownership and cooperative business models. These business models can play a critical role in the economic recovery of our localities, supporting our aims to create a fairer, stronger and more democratic economy. Within the pilot areas, we are seeing a deepening recognition and use of inclusive forms of ownership and seeing an increasing role for third sector interfaces in employee ownership and cooperative development. In addition, pilots are increasing the recognition of inclusive ownership as part of their supply chain, and it is encouraging these businesses to become part of their procurement and commissioning processes. So I've touched on where we are, so looking towards what the next steps are. I personally, in the Scottish Government, we see enormous potential in the community wealth building model, and I'm very keen that its practicality is demonstrated and proven as we consider legislation for implementing the approach in Scotland later in this Parliament. Of course, as has been touched on, the model has its origins in the USA, However, interest in the approach and fostering well-being focused economies is widespread, and our journey to legislation will be followed with interest across Europe and beyond, and we will also equally ensure that lessons are learned from across the world. I'm very much looking forward to continuing to work collaboratively with my fellow ministers and MSPs across the Scottish Parliament to ensure the legislation cements and augments the vital role local authorities and their partners in the public, private and third sectors can play in advocating a wellbeing economy. And we will, of course, also continue to engage with all key stakeholders as we build our expertise and learning from our pilot areas and others who share our desire to turn the dial by transforming an economy and delivering an economy and society with equality, sustainability and prosperity and resilience at its core. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to share these remarks with you, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion to follow.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really appreciate that. I think that was a really good, again, kind of overview of where things have got to. I'm sure some people in the audience may know some elements, but not others. So it was good to have that kind of pulled together in what you were saying around all the different pillars. Clearly no shortage of activity taking place and a real willingness, and it strikes me kind of energy being now being behind this whole initiative. So without further ado, we've obviously now had the kind of bigger picture strategic position that both Neil and Tom have outlined. And I'm moving on now to Vary Patterson, who is Community Wealth Building Coordinator with North Ayrshire Council. And Vary is here today to talk about really kind of successes and barriers from your own context, presumably, Vary, in terms of working on the North Ayrshire pilot. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Liz, and everyone for having me here today. I'm really excited to share what we've been up to. My name is Vary Patterson, Community Wealth Building Coordinator at North Ayrshire Council. And just to give a little bit of context from North Ayrshire and where we've come from in respect of community wealth building. We were the first Scottish local authority in Scotland to launch a community wealth building strategy back in May 2020. And we knew at that time that we had to take a different approach. Traditional forms of economic development weren't working for us. And we knew that we had to focus on something that was building an inclusive and resilient local economy that's fairer for everyone and more sustainable. And actually we worked with CLES a few years ago to undertake a diagnostic of North Ayrshire, and that helped us develop our strategy, and we've got a comprehensive 55-point action plan that works across all 5 community wealth building pillars. So the kind of things that we've been undertaken since launching the strategy, we have established a community wealth building commission. That's an Ayrshire-wide network of key regional anchor institutions, and on that we've also welcomed South and East Ayrshire councils, so it's a truly pan-Ayrshire approach alongside our other regional partners. We agreed a work plan of activities and established an officer working group in order to take that work plan forward and ensure that we worked in collaboration. In October 2020, we launched our Ayrshire Anchor Charter, which is 16 pledges aligned across the 5 pillars of community wealth building and a 6th pillar of climate action. And essentially what the Charter does is commits anchors to embedding community wealth building practices in their organisations and also ensuring that we have a long-term collaboration to help reach our mutual community wealth building goals. In October, just last year, in October 2021, we launched our first annual report on our community wealth building strategy, and that highlights our key achievements, progress, it gives examples of activities underway. So some of the kind of things that we highlighted in that report, we have 11 new community wealth building roles across the council, and that adds essential capacity to ensure that we take forward things from a place-based perspective and across the council as well. So these roles include a procurement development manager, community benefits officer, business locality officers, amongst others in regeneration, economic policy, and our communities team as well. So some of the things that they've been working on, developed a new process for improved collaboration between procurement and business development teams, including new steps in our quick quotes process, which seeks to grow local spend and develop local supply chains as well, and give those local organisations an opportunity to tender. We're also looking at our current community benefits policy, reviewing that, and we've also implemented a community wish list that better aligns supplier offers to the needs of the local communities as well. So that was only established in October, and we're seeing some good examples coming through there. Just also to touch on as well, as part of the Ayrshire Growth Deal, there's a £3 million community wealth building project on which the 3 Ayrshire local authorities are working on, and that seeks to unlock potential of public, private and social economy in Ayrshire, as well as established Fair Work Ayrshire service to support organisations to recruit locally and ensure that we have quality, meaningful work in Ayrshire. So as we've gone through the journey, we've understandably kind of encountered some challenges and bumps along the road, you know, absolutely to be expected given the scale and ambition of transformation that community wealth building seeks to do. And we found that collaborative working and partnership takes time. That will probably come as no surprise to any of you. But it's important to understand and recognise that anchor institutions can be different. They've got different challenges, different strengths, weaknesses, and they will be at different stages in their community wealth building journey. That's been something that's been very clear to us. It's important, in order to try and overcome these, it's important to support each other in this journey. Be prepared to challenge traditional forms of thinking, but we also need to build momentum through demonstrating quick wins as well. Other thing I would say is having the resources and the capacity to take forward community wealth building at pace and scale is absolutely crucial, and otherwise can hold back and hamper progress. Economic development teams are not a statutory requirement, however are delivering significant elements of community wealth building. It should also be recognised that some anchors don't have economic development teams as such, and they therefore lack the knowledge and the capacity to adequately support and develop the local business base, particularly in relation to developing the supply network, but also in relation to plural ownership and looking at alternative forms of ownership. Local authorities might be able to help in these areas, and that's something that we're looking at. However, we must acknowledge that stretches the existing resources there as well. I think just kind of finally in wrapping up our perspective in North Ayrshire, we also need to acknowledge that some of community wealth building goals kind of go beyond the capacity of a single anchor or a collaboration of anchor institutions. For example, looking at the feasibility of community and ethical banking and financial power, it requires support from regional and national organisations, including Scottish National Investment Bank, to support community wealth building through local investment opportunities. So like I said, these are kind of, as a quick whistle-stop tour through what we're trying to do in North Ayrshire, our community wealth building strategy, and some of the challenges that we're facing here as well. So looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks very much, Liz.
Thanks very much, Barry. Again, that was excellent and very, succinct, but thorough in terms of your experience and highlighting the different elements that are kind of key, I think, for people in our audience if they're just either beginning on this journey or partway through the journey. I think everyone, I hope, will either if they've not seen the annual report, we'll be looking at the annual report now, because I'm sure there's lots of really valuable information in there too for our audience members. Okay, we're moving now to our final speaker for this first part of this afternoon's session, and that is Gordon Mole, Head of Business and Employability with Fife Council. And again, he's also going to discuss the experience in Fife and the success and barriers that have arisen as part of this initial pilot journey. Over to you, Gordon.
Thanks, Liz, and really welcome the opportunity to follow on from others and be involved in this discussion today. So I think just a bit of background and history for our community wealth building journey in Fife. It really began in earnest in late 2020 when community wealth building was identified as a key theme for our recovery and reform process. That then led into discussions with elected members and crucially with our community planning partnership, the Fife Partnership, to develop an approach in parallel with work that we were doing through Scottish Government and the pilots. So we're standalone to some extent, working on a Fife-wide model, but also linking to Tay cities as one of our key city regions where community wealth building has formed a key plank of our Tay cities economic strategy action plan, and I'll come back to our regional activity in just a moment. I think the key positives for where we are now on the journey is that from those beginnings in 2020, community wealth building is now writ large through our local outcome improvement plan, which has been adopted in its consultation form by our community planning partnership. We've also got really strong anchor institution buy-in at this stage, but so that involves the local college, the University of St Andrews, NHS Fife Council, and critically for us, in terms of the success of this, the third sector interface, Fife Voluntary Action, amongst others. But I will come back to that as perhaps one of our challenges as we go forward. Links have also been made and are being refined for our other reform priorities. So the Minister referenced some of the key issues on the table at the moment, including addressing climate emergency, tackling poverty, increasing inclusion, and leading economic recovery. And community wealth building very much sits as an underpinning theme in Fife across all of those areas as they develop up their delivery plans. So we will be able to include and underwrite a lot of that with community wealth building actions on the ground. Neil spoke in his introduction about scale and whether and where community wealth building is delivered. And of course, in using Fife as an example, we're implementing the approach at all levels. So whether that's at a regional level across our two city regions, actions that will be taken forward Fife-wide, and also at a local level, so a sub-Fife level across our 7 area committee areas. And a number of my colleagues are on the call today who have responsibility on leading and implementing some of those functions within Fife. Working regionally, as I mentioned, community wealth building is very much embedded within the Tay Cities Regional Economic Strategy Action Plan, particularly in relation to fair work and local procurement, with a strong view around community benefits as part of that activity. To the south of us, for Edinburgh and South East Scotland, the new Regional Prosperity Framework has a big move in our parlance around anchor institutions. That's being led by Scottish Borders Council with input across not just the local authorities, the 6 local authorities, but also some of the national bodies, including Skills Development Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, Visit Scotland and others, to have a really rounded approach on how we drive forward that anchor institutions conversation in the Edinburgh and South East Scotland region. The Edinburgh and South East Scotland Community Benefit Portal is up and running, linking opportunities with area of need, and fair work and community wealth building are a really key plank of our No One Left Behind delivery and commissioning framework. We're now going into year 3 of No One Left Behind. This is our second year of commissioning right across Fife and beyond. And that includes an initial 80 long-term unemployed opportunities within anchor institutions, so making that direct link between CWB and the action plan that we have through CLES and those practical actions as we go forward. In terms of local spend, I think Fife was starting from a strong baseline, but we needed to understand what that baseline was. So my colleague Caroline McDonald and her colleagues in our corporate procurement team undertook that baseline. In the last reporting period, it was 37%. In the current reporting period, it's now up to 40%. So we're moving in the right direction, but recognise that there's a lot more to do in terms of that local spend, and obviously looking closely at other models across Scotland and beyond where that has been implemented. But it is a strong baseline on which to build. Fife has historically had very strong links to the Supplier Diversity Programme and an ongoing commitment from Fife Council and other partners to deliver against our local procurement agenda. So, for example, a joint Meet the Buyer event between the Council and Fife College was held late last year in relation to the Dunfermline Learning Campus, which is a joint capital spend and a real opportunity for some of that local supply chain development to come of age. But we haven't forgotten about the little things that we can do. So a number of tests of change are underway with a particular focus on the Kirkcaldy area. That includes local spend in advertising running up to the Christmas periods, working with those grassroots organisations such as Green Kirkcaldy and Love Our Langtoon, and particularly linking them to opportunities such as through Community Enterprise in Scotland, to have initial discussions and also looking specifically at community asset transfer work. And our commitments identified through prioritisation of the actions set out in the adopted CLES action plan include the development of an anchor institution charter, which is nearly ready for approval. Initially, that's involved, for those involved in the action plan, so those anchor institutions, the coalition of the willing, if you like, who already signed up to becoming anchor institutions and who've set their governance processes around community wealth building. So, for example, NHS Fife has an anchor board, which is at a senior executive level, so they can actually get on and make some decisions and deliver against their community wealth building priorities. But the intention for that institution charter is very much that we can roll it out to other public sector bodies who are not yet part of the active conversation, and I think critically the private sector. We have some really large private sector employers in Fife who we want to engage first in this process. But our experience of the living wage and becoming the UK's first living wage town was very much that actually it was a mix of small, including micro businesses, medium-sized businesses and our large organisations which help deliver against that part of the agenda. So a couple of challenges for me. I think one is around defining the ownership of the issue. So who leads, and that's something that we've been working quite hard with our anchor institutions on over the last few months, is who is prepared to take ownership of each of the actions identified within the action plan, so it doesn't become a single loud voice, i.e. the council leading on it, but it's a genuine partnership activity with genuine stakeholder commitment. And I think we need to enhance some of that and really test it in anger ahead of the run-in to community wealth building legislation that the Minister referred to. I think the second challenge for us as an anchor institution and for others is really creating a community wealth building culture. So how do we actually embed this into our organisations? How do each of our 16,500 staff at Fife Council understand their part in the community wealth building journey, whether that's at a personal level around things like spend local, whether it's at a professional level in terms of the actions that they take as representatives of the council, ambassadors of the council, and clearly at an organisational level as well. So we're embedding that within our change planning, our fair work approach, working with the trade unions and council services. And critically, we want to roll that out beyond our own bounds to other organisations as we go forward. I think there's two further and quite major challenges for me. One is if we're looking at plural ownership, if we're looking at just use of land and assets, there's a huge piece of work to be done on capacity building our communities in order to get there. So we're not going from a standing start of we created an opportunity, off you go. We do recognise there's a lot of work involved at a ground roots level to build the capacity of our communities to fully engage in this. And I think the second and probably linked part of that is really understanding the levers of control. And Scottish Government colleagues are probably fed up with me using that language, but I think it's an important one that actually this has to feed into the new legislation because in order to fully bring on anchor institutions which operate, say, at a national level or a UK-wide level, the legislation needs to be there to enable them to do something differently. We all need to have a risk-based approach in this, and we all need to be able to test models and really push the bounds within the existing legislation and regulatory framework that we have. But if we're going to see this, roll out at scale, I think that remains, one of the key challenges. We're really up for working on that with Scottish Government and with other organisations in Fife and beyond. So I'll leave it there, Liz. Hopefully that was helpful to colleagues.
That was excellent, Gordon. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, again, from both of the examples that we've heard from, it's really good to get a sense of why, community wealth building, it has to work at local level, because every locality has a different context, different opportunities, different partners, different setups. So I think those examples were really good at demonstrating that. I thought what you were saying there about, genuine partnership and addressing culture, I mean, that's just so much at the heart of all of this, isn't it? And I appreciate you might not have all the answers at this stage, but getting it on the table and actually getting some discussion around this is a really important starting point. Well, I'm conscious of time and we've drawn one slightly over in terms of the discussion, but I would like to take some questions if possible. I have to confess here, I'm having a slight problem with my screen at the moment because I can't for some reason see the chat box. So Neil, I'm probably going to have to call on you to help with this. And either that or we ask people to kind of raise their hand and come in on the discussion with any questions or points or comments they have. But Neil, can I just ask you, do you have any questions? Can you see any?
Yes, Liz, there's actually very helpfully.
Apologies for this.
Not at all. The community wealth-building community in this call is starting to answer the questions themselves in terms of other people asking questions and other people piling in, which is really helpful. But there's one particular question I want to ask to Gordon and Vary very quickly. And then I'll bring the Minister in just in terms of any key takeaways or key thoughts that that comes to mind when he's been listening to Gordon and Vary. But the question is really, very quickly, Gordon, Vary, is just, there's a question about the private sector and where they get involved in some of the pillars and what more can we do to get them included more in this agenda, and any thoughts on the private sector from your experience in North Ayrshire and Fife. Barry, you first, the private sector, and what pillars do they get involved in, and what is your experience of engaging with them, the private sector, more effectively?
Yeah, well, what we need to do as well is get our own house in order in relation to public sector as well, so that we can adequately share our learning and how we go forward for them. But one of the key things that we're looking to do will be through the Fair Work Ayrshire service, and that will engage private businesses, employers in order to embed fair work activities within their organisation. So that's obviously a key part of the fair employment pillar as well. I mean, I think there's more to be done across the other pillars, and that's where we need to scale up from there on in. But making sure that we have a good working conditions in Ayrshire is going to be absolutely crucial for how those businesses then grow and develop, and make sure that what they're doing for local residents in terms of who they're employing is truly benefiting those residents, and that it's going to help people to stay out of poverty. So I think that's one of the crucial ones that we're looking at.
Thanks, Barry. Just from my own experience, there's something very powerful about the clustering and the supply chains of existing larger private sector and how they can help to advance and grow the wider local supply chain, I think is quite key, and one that's maybe not as talked about as much as it should be in community wealth building, and certainly in Scotland, but needs to be talked more about the role of the larger private sector organisations and their role within the local economy. Gordon, any thoughts on this question about the private sector and where you see them fitting into pillars, and anything you think we should be thinking about in terms of advancement and lessons from Fife on that?
Yeah, I think there's probably three areas for me, Neil. I think as Barry touched on, fair work is probably the clearest entry point for the private sector in Fife. In 2018, we introduced the Fife Business Charter, which was, although we didn't know it at the time, effectively a sort of proto-community wealth building approach, focused on fair work, not only in terms of the real living wage, but in terms of treatment of staff, a pledge around recruitment, and I think making that work alongside some of the Scottish Government initiatives at the moment, such as No One Left Behind, is a real opportunity for that engagement. So businesses are engaging through that employability route. How do we use that to jumpstart the wider conversations around a fair work charter? And that's certainly our direction of travel as it is in Ayrshire. I think the second point is around local spend. So as well as those local supply chains, which often private sector businesses probably have a lot more flexibility around than public sector and academic sector organisations, where they can adapt and be fleet of foot. And we saw that in practice through the pandemic, where businesses were having to onshore a lot of their supply chain. It's how we kind of grow that, expand that, and really create an ecosystem around it. But not forgetting that businesses are people too. And I think as we roll out the culture of community wealth building, particularly areas like spend local, how do businesses encourage that through their employee rewards models to spend locally, for example. I think critically for both private and public sector, how do we actually recognise and reward businesses who are doing the right thing? So businesses who are engaging in this, how do they get some credit for doing so? Not just in potential access to public sector contracts, for example, but how do we influence consumer behaviour by having some reward system where we can mark out those businesses who are on this journey with us and encourage those who aren't to perhaps come into the fold. I think just very quickly, the third area for exploration for me is around land and assets. We've got National Planning Framework 4 going through at the moment, and on the back of that, local development plans being redrawn. We also have, through climate change, businesses who are making some considerations about how they use their land and assets, what may no longer be fit for purpose, etc. What's the active role of communities in saying, well, if you're looking to exit from that, we would be interested in taking it on for. So as much as we're looking at public sector land and assets as a starting place, I think there's also a clear role through the planning process to influence and shape some of what that looks like for the private sector. In Scotland, we don't have the same levers of power, perhaps through the Section 106 process. In England, Section 75 isn't a direct equivalent, and is much more sort of tightly bound in terms of mitigation. But again, there's an opportunity, I think, in the long term to look at how we can create that sort of reward structure or incentivization structure around land and assets.
No, thank you for both. Thank that, Gordon. Fantastic, and an excellent session there in terms of the strategic, but getting into the granular too. So thanks for that, Mr. Arthur. I just wonder if there's any final thoughts, really key takeaway or takeaways what you've heard so far, and any of the comment on the chat. Any thoughts, Mr. Arthur?
Thank you, Neil, and my apologies to Vary. Unfortunately, my internet aforementioned connectivity issues struck and I had to log out and log back in, so I'm unfortunately missed most of your contribution in the beginning of Gordon's, but I think I really just want to sort of pick up in the last points that Gordon made, because I think it illustrates the interconnected nature. I noticed a comment maybe yourself had made in the chat bar about the need to weave the pillars together and think holistically, but that is the approach we're taking across government, because I may be the community wealth minister, but community wealth doesn't start and end with me in government. It's really something that has to be government wide. And so just to pick up on some of the points that were being made, we do have national planning framework before going through, and we have these 6 universal policies under sustainable places, one of which is community wealth building. But if we think about some of the points that Gordon was making with regards to incentivising more local spend, another area that sits with me is the Scotland Loves Local campaign and the work we've been doing through there with different strands, through resource grants, through the advertising campaign to promote local spend, and indeed the Scotland Loves Local gift cards. And of course, I made reference in my speech to the Land Reform Bill. We also have commitments on CPO CSO later in this Parliament. I think we'd recognise it to realise our ambitions and the ambitions of the NPF4, the forthcoming Town Centre Action Plan. It's emerged from the work of the review group. Land assembly powers are going to be important. Where we do have existing powers, I think there's a recognition that there is a need for a refresh in that particular area as well. Reference was also made to Section 75. Again, there's the ongoing review of that. We have our commitments as part of our wider planning reform programme to look at the infrastructure levy positions that were within the 2019 Planning Act. So across a whole range of areas, we are looking at how we can almost unconsciously, it's all geared towards and gravitating towards the community wealth building approach. And so that community wealth building approach, while it may be explicit in some actions such as a community wealth building bill that will be forthcoming, it is also informing work streams right across government. And indeed, we have further work in local government around local governance review, resourcing of local government as well. So across, as I say, many different areas, all of that work is feeding in. I think in terms of, I suppose, that to bring things together, ultimately, the clues in the term community wealth building is a local economic model where in aggregate a nation benefits as a whole, a wider society, and it is so important that it is driven forward by local government. And I recognise fundamentally that community wealth building will mean different things in different localities, and it will have different applications within those sub-localities, so to speak. So there's a process ongoing right now of learning, and that learning in sessions like this are so important because they help to inform that learning process, which is going into this process of developing legislative proposals that will come forward later in the Parliament. So in terms of what I envisage for legislation, yes, it will be about consolidating and cementing existing gains, but it will also be looking to the greatest extent possible under the devolution settlement, address any of these barriers that are identified. And I recognise as well some of the barriers that will be highlighted are not barriers that require a legislative remedy, others will do. So the community wealth building bill, while that will perhaps be a culmination of our work over the coming years, I will also be alive and look for opportunities for perhaps lower hanging fruit where there can be further support provided in advance of that. I say at the moment, the kind of key priority for me is to be reaching out and engaging as much as possible with local authorities across Scotland, sharing in that learning and allowing that to inform a community wealth building legislation that is relevant and applicable to all parts of Scotland and supports all parts of Scotland to recognise their community wealth building potential. And I'm committed to doing that to the maximum extent that the powers of the Scottish Parliament allow for. And on that note, I'm conscious that I've hit 3 o'clock, which is my allotted time concluded, but I'm looking forward to further engagement going forward. And again, very grateful for the opportunity to have spoken this afternoon, to have participated, and for all the comments that have been shared. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today, but it's really important to have your input, as given you're at the heart and leading on this agenda. So thank you. And we will, I'm sure, see you again at future EDAS events. I'm going to move on now. I think there was a question come in to me, Neil, which was really about how does community wealth building, how does the approach align with the place-based investment programme. But I actually think that Tom kind of touched on quite a lot of that there in terms of there's a real commitment, isn't there, to pull together all the many strands of policy and initiatives across government, which is clearly a complex process, but a really important one. Okay, so we're going to move on now to keep to time, and I'm going to invite Stephen Balfour, who's Projects Officer, Planning and Economic Development Services and Community and Enterprise Resources with South Lanarkshire Council. And Stephen's going to talk to us really more from about the early stage of involvement with community wealth building in that area and how progress is being made. So can I pass on to you now, Stephen?
Yeah, Liz, and thank you very much. Yeah, I suppose it's important to point out that we're a wee bit behind, obviously, Vary and Gordon's situation at North Ayrshire and Fife, and we're, I suppose, at a relatively early stage of our journey. So the South Lanarkshire Council Community Wealth Building Strategy was launched last year in March 2021. A couple of months later, in June, we launched our action plan. And our action plan includes 50 high-level actions across the 5 pillars. I suppose in the 9 or 10 months since the launch of the strategy, our experience has been about trying to put the right foundations in place. Some of this isn't the most exciting work, but it's trying to make sure we've got the right kind of structures in place. So one of the first things we began with was a kind of officers group, really, to coordinate activity across the council. That is a council only kind of group, and it includes council representatives from across all the different services in the council. In September of last year, we launched a commission. So the intention is for our Community Wealth Building Commission, that's at a more senior level. So representatives, that includes the Chief Executive of the Council, the Leader of the Council, elected officials, and also senior representatives from key anchor institutions such as NHS, Lanarkshire, University of the West of Scotland. And then the final group that we've created was, and it's just been created this month, is a Community Wealth Building Progress group, and that's a bit of an intermediate body between the council kind of working group and the commission. Again, it includes council representatives, but it's actually chaired by the Chief Executive of our voluntary sector interface organisation. And the vice chair is basically the representative from the FSB, the Scottish chair of the Federation of Small Business. So there's only been one meeting of that group so far, but I suppose the intention of both the commission and for this progress group is to ensure there's accountability. It's not the council, it's just represented with these groups. And I suppose it's just to ensure that we deliver against the action plan and ensure that it's not just a council only kind of document and efforts that are getting delivered. So since the strategy launch itself, there's been a lot of work that's kind of taking place across quite a number of different areas, including community asset transfer, looking at repurposing neglected town centre assets. There's work to progress a social enterprise strategy. But probably the biggest change that's occurred is to do with our quick quote process. Quick quotes previously covered contracts worth up to £50,000 and required 2 out of 5 bidders to be local businesses. There's been a change to the council standing orders, and now that means that 4 out of the 5 bids should be from local organisations, local businesses. And contracts can go up to £2 million. That's for construction and other works. It doesn't apply to just goods and services. So we think there's a very big opportunity there, and I suppose it's trying to deliver that now. I think in terms of other things since the launch has taken place that we've noticed is, as an organisation, I think we've become better informed. We've got better baseline information to do with where we're starting from. There's a greater, more in-depth knowledge about the opportunities and challenges involved in community wealth building. We've used tools such as Grow Local I think we've got a far better understanding where there's genuine opportunities for us to increase local spend. Improved knowledge has been shared with others. So some of that's been external, so trying to share learning with anchor institutions and get them involved. Also, we've done some stuff with local residents, local businesses. For example, on the South Lancaster Council website is a promotional film by the leader of the council explaining what community wealth building is and what it's all about. But equally, there's been an awful lot of dialogue internally as well. For example, if you look at local spend, there's been a lot of conversations taking place between economic development, between procurement, between services, for example, such as roads or housing and tech, who do a lot of the contracting on behalf of the council, and then with external kind of bodies such as supplier development programme as well. So we're trying to tease out the real opportunities, see what the barriers are, and trying to make inroads into that just now. So in terms of, I'm conscious of time, what we're planning to do next, obviously we're starting to do some work on a 1-year report on the progress to date. We do want to try and see if we can deliver some quick wins, particularly in relation to the changes in the quick quote process, which are still relatively new. If we can deliver these quick wins, these early successes, we intend using these as case studies to try and, again, just get people motivated, interested and engaged with the community wealth building efforts. And I suppose one thing we have noticed is we're starting to get inquiries, not maybe from individual private businesses at this moment in time, but other groupings, other third sector organisations asking us for what is community wealth building, what is the council doing, and asking how they play their own part, which we certainly welcome. And because I think a long-term aspiration for the council becomes less and less of a council only kind of initiative, and it becomes more of a shared effort across a wide variety of partners. So hopefully that gives a flavour of what we've done to date, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come today.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Again, just really clear and comprehensive description of what looks like a lot of work that's actually taken. I mean, I know you're saying we're relatively new, but actually it looks like you've been really working hard to embed some really strong foundations, structures, and also just kind of checking in on, who it is that you need to be partnering with, engaging, and what processes and systems, etc., are really crucial to all of that. So that was really interesting. I'm going to move on now. Similar kind of overview in terms of the progress in the Western Isles, and this is from Callum Ian McIver, who we've had before at our events last year. Really great contribution last year as well, Callum. So Callum is Director for Communities. So this is a very different kind of council area, clearly, a different context, but really interested to see how things are progressing since we last saw you last year.
Many thanks, Liz, and good afternoon, everyone. Just as a wee bit of context and background where we're sitting at the moment, this time last year we were working with Cles and Neil developing our action plan. Action plan was finalised in June, and in early summer we took it through the various council structures to get approval of that. So in many ways, some of the critical things that we've been doing over the past period have been around culture. We were very, very keen to ensure that all our elected members were bought into this, that they understood, what it meant and understood what the implications of it were. So I think they understood at a high level as you're taking it through committee, but we were wanting to ensure that they had a more detailed knowledge and understanding. So we almost did a set of one-to-one sessions with each elected member, taking them through, getting them to understand, getting them to be fully behind this. We've set up an officers group and allocated officers to try and take forward each specific action within the plan. So our plan has got 21 different actions across the 5 pillars. We are going to put in place specific training for the officers leading on each of these themes, and we're looking to how we best do that at the moment. The other thing we've agreed to do is within the council's induction process, every new member of staff will be introduced through induction to community wealth building, so that everyone joining the local authority will know that we are a community wealth building local authority, that we're supportive of community wealth building, and try and give them, you know, a decent basic maybe understanding of what community wealth building is through that induction process. The other thing we've been doing on culture is looking at procurement and how we take procurement forward. So we've agreed with our head of procurement, head of legal, that we will have a fundamental redraft of the entirety of the council's procurement strategy, a total refocusing of that strategy. And some of the concepts that we've been talking about are in regard to population and how we can potentially use procurement to maintain population in some of our most challenged communities. So as we know, the Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides are facing, quite stark, population challenges. And we've got the phenomenon of population drift, where population is coming in from the periphery and beginning to congregate around services in our bigger communities, around Stornoway in particular. So can we use procurement to target bits of work out into the periphery to try and maintain business, to maintain communities and maintain activity, thereby maintaining population in some of these really challenged communities. So our head of procurement is on the cusp of kicking that piece of work off, and that piece of work will be ongoing over the next period. As well as culture, we've chosen two or three things, or I'll speak about two or three things that are very specific to the Outer Hebrides that we've tried to do. So as well as doing the cultural strategic stuff, we wanted to be able to do things that demonstrate very real things on the ground, to both for businesses and communities. So as part of the initial procurement stuff, we've brought all our construction sector together, and we've had two sessions with all the construction sector, talking them through community wealth building, introducing some of the concepts to them, and not challenging them, but having a conversation with them in regard to what they could bring. So we had that. The last session we had was about 2 weeks ago, and a number of them have come back and have asked for one-to-one sessions, where we go where they want a bit more detail and they want to put some thoughts and ideas to us in regard to what the construction sector may be able to offer. So we're having the first one-to-one session with one of possibly our main contractor on Friday afternoon. Some of the other things that we've been doing have been related to housing and land supply for housing. 75% of all the land in the Outer Hebrides is now owned by the community. So you'd think land supply would be relatively easy, but the land is also under crofting tenure, which can be very, very challenging, because each crofter in a township almost has a right of veto over what happens to the land. So we've developed a process of maintaining our traditional call for sites type approach through the local development plan, but we've also started a process of proactive engagement with each of the community landowners and each of the grazings committees. Now, there's a plethora of 150 or so grazings committees in the Outer Hebrides, so dealing with each of them is quite a resource intensive bit of business. But we've written to them all, we've engaged with them all, we've gone out and met with them all. We've done land walkovers over all the land that they think can be released for housing. And the other thing we've done is we've facilitated discussions between neighbouring grazings committees. So, for example, you may have a grazings committee in one township is willing to do something, but if the township next door isn't willing to do stuff, it can get a bit challenging. So we've brought that down to facilitating discussions within communities. And what we're seeing from that is an understanding, a better understanding of why we need land, why we need more housing, and thereby a greater willingness to begin to release land. So we're seeing more land being offered, you know, for housing through this process. So we're seeing a very direct result, you know, from the Community Wealth Building Action Plan already. Under Green Job Strategy, we've had quite an interesting process. As you'll be aware, ScotWind has been going on over the next period, County State Scotland leasing round for the marine environment. There are 3 blocks on ScotWind in Hebridean waters, and through, you know, industry and market intelligence, we were aware of a number of the potential bidders who would be, you know, potentially bidding into that. Most of them being, you know, multinational companies. So we engaged with these companies. We were keen to talk to them about what we thought their responsibilities to the community were, what their responsibilities to the Outer Hebrides were, how they went about procuring their projects. So again, very much a conversation with these companies. And out of that, there came a process where we spoke to them about the communities onshore who would be closest to their lease areas. So they agreed to get into a conversation with these communities. So we facilitated the 5 community estates to meet with these two multinational companies. We've had a period of discussion over the past 6 or so months, which has resulted in a memorandum of understanding between the council, between the 2 companies, and between the 5 community estates around about the types of community benefits we anticipate coming through these projects. So these range from, you know, everything from, you know, jobs being delivered into communities to how we put, you know, green energy into communities to help with fuel poverty, through job creation to a community wealth fund. So we've agreed a memorandum of understanding, so we're very much at the start of an ongoing conversation with these communities. But I think it places us in a good position for the next period. And the other thing that's very specific to the Outer Hebrides I'll mention, which is in our action plan, is repopulation zones. I mentioned previously, you know, we do have a challenge of loss of population in the Outer Hebrides, and we're keen to try and take proactive action to try and address some of that. So through the repopulation zone, we want to be very place-based, and we've identified Uist as the place where we want to target some very, you know, focused actions. So we're advertising for the moment for a settlement officer, so we're hopeful of getting someone in place. That settlement officer will try and promote Uist, you know, to a wider audience. We'll seek to work with new people potentially coming into the area. We'll help with integration, help them signposting them to, you know, the appropriate place. We want to work with young people and housing, to provide housing for young people to again cement them into the community. And the other thing we want to do is build community hubs in some of these communities and begin to start dispersing the public sector out of our centralised locations in Stornoway and Ballyvanny, for example, and getting the public sector to go out into the community and to locate in the community. So, you know, the whole COVID experience, we're all working from home, we're all going hybrid in different ways. So there's a real opportunity, I think, of working with the community to get new types of work out, decentralised, out of offices and located into community. So that is some of the work we'll be doing in repopulation zones over the next period. So I realise I'm taking up quite a reasonable amount of time, but that gives hopefully a quick, sharp overview of some of the areas we've been working in the Outer Hebrides.
I think, thank you so much. I think everyone would have found that really, really interesting because it's just very different to the other examples that we've looked at around the kind of islands and rural dimension. I suppose maybe just before we kind of open up to questions from the floor, I'm curious to know, would you say that, I know you've obviously made the case that you're relatively new to this community wealth building process in the Western Isles, but from some of those initiatives, it sounds as though having this community wealth building approach in place has actually been really important, the timing of it. And I'm just wondering to what extent you feel that had you not started this process with some of those major initiatives taking place, or the issues around the repopulation, our depopulation, you know, what differences has made, even in the short term?
Yeah, I think it's made quite a fundamental difference. In some ways, you could argue that there was a form of community wealth building ongoing in the Outer Hebrides anyway. Like I mentioned, you know, 75% of the land is in community ownership. We've got about just short of 30 megawatts of renewable energy wind generation in community ownership. We've got, you know, any number of community bodies, community development trusts. So there was a lot of work that you could sort of badge under community wealth building if you were so minded. But what I think this has done has focused in the attention, particularly around, you know, how you use anchor institutions to create new activity out in communities, and how communities can work with you to generate new economic, social activity. It's put a greater focus on things like fair work, and it's focused out council in, I think, in a way that it wasn't before, on the potentials that come through this type of work. So I definitely think, you know, what we've done under Green Jobs Strategy, some of the stuff we've done under repopulation has been very much, you know, based on learning that we've learned from Neil and Cles, you know, over the last period, and that's come through in the action plan. I think we would have got there eventually, but certainly community wealth building has focused it and given us a more sharper focus on this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and perhaps and drawn together strands that perhaps were separate, but actually has brought that together in a way that might not have been the case.
Absolutely, I think a lot of this is, you know, interrelated. You know, from the housing required to keep population, to how you procure to keep population, to, you know, how you use jobs to keep population. So all of these things in the Outer Hebrides are interrelated.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Callum. Okay, Neil, I may need to call on you again, given my lack of ability to view the chat room at the moment. But just to finish off today, we've got about 6 minutes left. So just before we do that, and before we're going to put up some final questions, I know we're going to have a poll. I think I'm getting help with this, if Alison's there. And so we're going to ask you to participate in a poll for us, and I hope everyone is able to do this. We've got obviously a link there that you can access, or you can use the I've forgotten the word for it.
QR code. There's a QR code on screen, and there's a link also in the chat box. So I'll just let people log on.
Yeah, we'll give you just a minute to do that. Looks like quite a lot of. How many have we still got left in the room? 75. So we're up to 16 accessing.
What we can do, we can also circulate the survey in a follow-up email afterwards as well. So I'll go to the first question.
Do we have questions as well in the chat box, Neil, that we're looking to accommodate after this?
I think, given time, we should just perhaps do the questions here online, and then close at that point. But we'll just go through this. I think don't have much time, do we? So
no, we don't have that much time. But what I would say is, if anyone has anything that they're burningly important, that they're really wanting to put to our presenters today, please do let us know, and we can pass that on, obviously. Okay, so first question, which sector do you work in? Now, obviously, we've not got everybody on the call participating in this, but as you might expect, majority public sector. Good to see a good third sector turnout here, and some private sector. Okay, I think we're up at 50 respondents there.
We do need to, in part of the consultation and moving forward, Mr. Arthur's obviously aware of this, is that, you know, extend interest and work within the private sector, which was similar to some of the questions we had as well. So we do need to do more work on that for sure, I think.
Yeah. Okay. How many more questions, Alison? Remind me.
There's five more questions, so I'll just move on to the second question.
Move on. Yeah,
second question now.
That was just a warm up. Okay, so we're just trying to get a sense of who's in the audience today and what role you play in advancing community wealth building in your area. So it's not just one. If you can obviously indicate all of the ones that would apply to you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of reflecting the audience, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, and quite a strategic sort of flavour, though we are getting
a little bit of sector and private.
Yeah, strategic flavour, but not so much on the project or service. But that's maybe that's good.
Yeah, but that probably reflects the nature of this event, actually, Neil. And
yeah, absolutely, Liz.
Okay.
That's really helpful.
Now we're at 50. I think we'll move on to the next one. I think that was what we got for the last response as well. So can we move on to the next one, Alison? Okay, what kind of support can EDAS offer? Okay, so again, we're thinking clearly we have a range of sessions already scheduled for next sessions and theme dates, and etc., which we will circulate to you. But we're always open to hearing from you about where you think you need help and what you're looking for from these sessions. So the content can still be shaped to reflect that. Okay, all fairly evenly split by the looks of it. Okay.
Yeah, translating policy into practice. That's where the communities of practice come in, doesn't it, Liz? The sort of sister or associated activity to this open events. So
so we'll make sure that the learning from that is being fed in, and the examples. It's good to hear that people are still interested in hearing from others. Okay.
Worth just giving another plug for the event on the 15th, isn't it, with international examples, which should be quite interesting to see how other jurisdictions and contexts, specifically USA, are taking this forward. So book yourself up for the 15th.
Yes. We have sessions throughout February, March, April and May. So we will, I don't know, have these been have all the details been circulated for each of the events yet, Alison?
Yes, so we've circulated the save the dates, and the booking links will follow. We'll email everyone attending here today the next link for the 15th of February.
Okay, so we've got another question here. What does success of community wealth building look like for you, or like to you? This is an open question, clearly.
Yeah, we're looking for the wordsmiths here, and a pithy little epithet that we can rip off.
The cloud.
Fair society. Got a few on spending. Public plural ownership, very good. System change.
Yeah. Wealth distribution.
Resilience.
Economy that works for people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I think if we were doing this a year and a half ago, it would have been very much focused on local spending procurement, but we're getting this wider ownership questions and wider social and ecological justice questions, which is good to see as the movement grows.
Yep.
Oh, very quick typers. Excellent stuff. Yeah, decision makers and local anchors. I think that's a very good point there. Nice one. Keeping wealth local.
Active communities. I like that one too.
Well, look at this person. Here's written better, fair employment opportunities for residents. More spend locally with public and private sector. Some going in the diverse and vibrant third side. Well, there's a lovely epithet, isn't there? We could have that.
Someone who's writing a strategy, I think.
Yeah, somebody knows their stuff there. That's kind of great stuff. Whoever that was.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we move on to the last one. Yeah, here we go. So what are the barriers of implementing community wealth building? Okay. So, yeah, I guess, again, open to people to put their thoughts We've obviously heard some from the presenters today, but which may echo with your own experience.
Outdated mindsets.
More? Not sure what that. Policy, I think, yeah, that must be.
Policy, yeah. Data, more.
Yeah.
Oh, the more was me. I did a mistake. I was trying to move on. And the more was me, so apologise. That was, yeah, there's only one idiot, and it's me. And the, yeah.
Looking up our survey, Neil.
Lack of resource. Yeah, I'm looking it up.
Okay, yeah, culture, yeah. That's coming up a lot.
These are great. National policy support, yeah, on it. Increasing awareness of concept. Yep. Excuses. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excuses. I like that one. Red tape.
I've just got one more question, Neil, and then what we can do is we can circulate these if anyone has anything else to add.
Aye, great.
That's okay. And
make sure there's any questions we've not picked up, Alison, that we can try and answer that after the event.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah. Okay.
It's been a great event. We just rushed out of time as these things happen.
Final one, if we can quickly do this. What government or other interventions can help alleviate the barriers?
Might be similar to the previous one.
Yeah.
Raise profile. Yeah. Raise profile. There it is. Oh, awareness.
Awareness. And support. Okay.
Funding support, fund support, fund support.
So a lot of getting the message out there.
Joined up legislation, don't have committee up on sitting out the side. I think that's them certainly aware of that internally. And as Mr. Arthur alluded to, of course, it does need to be additive and joined up.
Yeah, workshops. Okay, so some of this, so clearly some of it is about what you can do in government, Neil, and some of it's what we can do in terms of our support to this initiative as well. So we'll take on board what's being said here in terms of how we shape the future programmes or events.
Yeah, my Scottish Government colleagues on the call will be all eyes on these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Great stuff.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you so much. Right, we're still only slightly over time. I mean, we're starting to lose people. So if I can just very quickly say a huge thank you to everybody who has participated and presented today, to Neil, to Tom, to Barry, Gordon, Stephen and Callum. Once again, as always, content really excellent and informative, and that's what we're here to do. As ever, you know, we're doing this online, so we're trying to make the best of how we work on that in that context. So the combination of questions, as we say, any comments in the chat, materials, etc., all of that will be captured. You will get a copy. This has been recorded, so you will get that sent to you. You'll be able to replay it at your leisure. And as we said, please look out for details of the next one and do sign up. I think having an international perspective on what's happening elsewhere is going to be really informative, and we wanted to bring that dimension in this year. We didn't include it really last year, so we're really keen to hear about what Neil has learned and others can share with us about what's happening in other countries on this. So once again, thank you. Really look forward to seeing you all at the next session on the 15th of February. All of our sessions are running kind of either early afternoon, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, hopefully to accommodate your availability. So anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. And please do get in touch if there's anything you want to raise or you feel you want anything further from us as we move forward with the programme. Okay, bye, folks.